Lately, everybody's been talking about Quentin Tarantino's newest and ninth film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and yes, we're here today to do a little bit of that. But when you're talking about such a legendary director who left such a lasting impression on the film industry, you just kind of want to do something equally as big, equally interesting in a place like this. You know, we love our studio space here. We love this set, but I feel a little constrained. I think we need something a little bigger and a little more professional. So I think starting today, we're just gonna tear this whole fucking thing down. We're gonna start from scratch. Joe,
Yeah.
let's tear this motherfucker down.
Let's tear it down.
We're tearing it down.
Tear it down. Don't yank the tape.
I'm not doing it. He's doing it. That's his job. He's back now, so I get to have him do this.
Here you go, cookies.
Cookie?
I don't know what to say. Like, I mean, you see the shit happening, but you gotta act like you don't see the shit. That's the trick. I don't understand that, man.
Hey guys, we are back after a bit of a hiatus here. We spent a few weeks traveling for business, and as you can see, making a lot of changes here around the office. Hopefully things that make these videos just a little bit better. We, of course, were excited to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but knew there would be no shortage of reviews for all of you, so we wanted to really take our time and collect our thoughts. We got a couple new videos coming out soon as well, but right now, we are going to focus on whether or not you should see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. As I mentioned, it is the ninth film by Quentin Tarantino, and of course, he's a director with a wonderful portfolio and catalog of films. I think when we look back in 20 or 30 years, he's going to have one of the 20-year runs for the ages, with films like Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. I love Jackie Brown. I think a lot of folks don't. And I think it's because they saw Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and started to understand what the Tarantino style was, and Jackie Brown kind of threw him for a loop. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is not quite unlike that experience. I know that when I left the theater and I was talking to people who saw the movie with me, a lot of them really hated it. They thought it was slow, it was poorly paced, that the dialogue wasn't quite what they expected. What I mean by that is when you see a writer-director like a Quentin Tarantino or an Aaron Sorkin or a Kevin Smith or anybody of that nature, you begin to expect certain directorial and writing tics, certain habits that they have that you come to know them by. And of course, Quentin Tarantino is known for his legendary pop culture-laden dialogue. This film doesn't quite have a lot of that, but it does have some interesting characterization. Front and center, the relationship between Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, who are both fantastic in this movie, really helped to bind the movie together as sort of a bromance for the ages. That said, it's about a 2-hour, 45-minute movie, and so sometimes that can get a little bit draining. Now, I don't want to get into any spoilers on this, but lo and behold, we do soon have a video coming out that's going to do a deep dive, not just into Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but how to kind of understand that movie in the context of Tarantino's career. It's going to be a special we call The Two Quentins, kind of examining before Kill Bill and after Kill Bill, how the director's style changed and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or somewhere in between. Spoiler, it's probably somewhere in between. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, as we're nearing the end of what Tarantino says will be a 10-film career, is definitely a continuation of the style that you may have seen in Django Unchained and Inglourious Bastards, where you start to see more of that cartoonish violence to an extent, although there's maybe not as much of it all throughout, and your characters are a little less Tarantino archetypes and more of these really fascinating, pulled from the 50s and 60s characters who at first definitely seem to fit into a cliche, but soon spiral out into something memorable and unique. And that's really a credit to Tarantino. Without giving any spoilers away, I think that Brad Pitt's character in this film is definitely something that you would have seen out of a film noir. There are many aspects of that genre in this movie, but the dialogue, again, although not quite as loquacious as past efforts by Tarantino, really give you a three-dimensional character. And the performance by Brad Pitt, as I mentioned, is not just great, but probably one of the better performances of the last 10 or 15 years, and reminds you that Brad Pitt at one time really was a fantastic and unique leading actor. Not that he's been poor in the last 10 years, but his roles really haven't been that challenging. I'd say ever since Benjamin Button, I really haven't been that impressed. Coda back to World War Z, if you're just curious about what I mean by that. And DiCaprio, of course, is always fantastic, and in this movie, playing something a little out of the ordinary. It reminds me a bit of some of his first roles, playing a somewhat timid kind of character who can snap back and forth into this hyper-masculine TV star from the 50s and 60s. Interestingly, there are other great actors in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I would really struggle to find many other great performances. Al Pacino shows up in a cameo that really could have been played by anybody. Bruce Dern comes in for a cameo that really could have been played by anybody. And even some of the historical kind of cameos, like Margot Robbie playing Sharon Tate. It's not really a spoiler because Tarantino himself said it. A lot of people think this is a Manson family movie, Charles Manson family movie. It's really not. That definitely factors into it. And while I was happy with the way that it played into the overall storyline, you can't help but feel like Margot Robbie was a bit wasted here, and that the Sharon Tate character is something that if you had to cut something, you could probably cut her scenes out, save about half an hour, and still save the core that really entertained me, kind of the characters at the forefront of the movie. It would impact the final act, but whether or not that's something that matters to you would require spoilers. This definitely seems to be a very polarizing picture, and I think as it maturates in my mind as time passes and I think more about it, I'm growing more fond of it, and I would call it a good film, not a great film. But here's the biggest thing. If I were to tell you right now what I think was really good about the film, the caveats also equal what are bad about the film. In other words, the dialogue, it's very good. It's just not Tarantino good. The cinematography, it's very nice and it's unobtrusive, and certain scenes you can tell are shot in such a way, in a familiar way that Tarantino has used in Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, in Inglourious Bastards with they use 3 with these fingers scene. But the tension that the film is trying to create really doesn't come through. It's not really conveyed. At no point did I really feel what I think the emotion was that the scene was trying to convey. Similarly, the acting is really good, but in many parts it's kind of wasted. Margot Robbie is Sharon Tate again. I think Bruce Dern, wasted in his cameo. Al Pacino, wasted in his cameo. Michael Madsen, because he apparently has to show up in every single Tarantino film. You know, he's there quite briefly. It is a film with great actors, and for Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, great acting, but not necessarily something that I would call a highlight in terms of performances, and I think a lot of that comes from the hollowness I felt in the script. The soundtrack I have no caveats for. That is actually pretty fantastic, and if you like Paul Revere and the Raiders, you're going to have a great time. And as far as the hyperviolence, as I said, it's not all throughout the picture, but when it comes, it comes full force. In a very strange way, it kind of reminds me of like if Tarantino were trying to direct his version of the type of film that Drive was. It's a film that is kind of a very long, slow burn leading to a very chaotic third act. And in that sense, it's definitely a very interesting approach to take, and I think in many ways it's enjoyable. But the biggest thing is I don't think I'd ever see it again. I think if I had a Tarantino marathon where I had to watch all of the movies, this isn't the film I dread seeing. That's Hateful Eight. This is the film that, all right, let's get through it and get to the next one. And hopefully, as I thought about it more, and if I ever saw it again, it's one of those movies where you continue to appreciate new little small things. But as far as being an entry into his catalog, it's serviceable. It's a wonderful love letter to that era in Hollywood. But make no mistake about it. Of course, this is not a bad film. And I think a lot of people think it was a bad film because they're expecting something near the pinnacle of Tarantino's career. You just can't get that every single time. To me, I thought Hateful Eight was an objectively bad film. Not just because I was disappointed that it wasn't one of Tarantino's best, I just really didn't enjoy it. This film, by comparison, I think if it was done by anybody else, I might give it a little more slack. And I've tried to be more compassionate about it as time has passed since watching it. And I think that I've come to accept that it's a good but not great film, and that's okay. So if you want to kill 2.5 hours, go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But as I say about that kind of hollowness I felt in Tarantino's directing style and it just not clicking, just remember, as the title implies, it's sort of a dark fairy tale. But good fairy tales sort of have a moral of the story that you can take home. And if there is one in this movie, aside from not killing your wife with a harpoon gun, I'm not quite sure what the hell it is. Hey guys, like we said, we are back now. Sorry for the brief hiatus. We've been doing a lot of different things around the studio, trying to prepare for some new projects we're working on that we're going to be sharing with you quite soon. We have some new reviews coming up for you. We're very ecstatic to be back. So if you like what you've seen here and you're new, like, subscribe, comment, shoot me a tweet, email thing, add me to your MySpace, do whatever. And if you're not new here and you're a subscriber, hey, we're back. So how you been? You been good? Did you get that thing checked out? I'm just, I know that you're not concerned about it, but I got this uncle, and it's your life. Live your life. Live your best life.